Welcome everybody. I'll begin today by acknowledging that I'm facilitating this webinar from the lands of the Kaurna people in South Australia. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from those joining around the country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to extend our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining our webinar today. My name is Emma Lawrence and I'm a Senior Consultant at DVE and I'll be facilitating today's session. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared to everyone after the session, so please keep an eye out for the email. As we will be recording the session, I respectfully ask that you do not use a third-party app to record the session yourself. As part of the webinar setting on Zoom, you'll be on mute throughout the session. We've had some really fantastic questions submitted during registration, and I hope our discussion will cover the majority of those questions. If we have time, we'll try and respond specifically to some of them, and I apologise in advance if we don't get around to your questions. You can also submit additional questions through the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll try and answer some of them if we have enough time. A little bit about DVE. We're a consultancy who've been providing solutions for over 15 years in the higher education sector. We've worked with over 36 Australian universities and numerous TAFEs and private providers to deliver hundreds of projects across our business lines of governance and compliance, organisational improvement and digital transformation. We work across all aspects of the education lifecycle, whether it's through initial or re-registration and accreditation, process improvement, student experience, change, communications and systems implementation. I'd now like to introduce our panellists. Mary Louise Hupperts, better known as ML, is the CEO of the Association for Tertiary Education Management, the leading member association for all staff working in tertiary education across Australia, New Zealand and the broader region. With more than a decade of sector experience and diverse leadership experience across both public and private sectors, ML works to foster change leadership and strengthen the sector's impact. Under her leadership, ATEM's professional development, conference and leadership offerings have been revitalised to support a vision for a connected, engaged and thriving tertiary education sector. Prior to joining ATEM, ML was the Director of Change and Transformation at the Victoria Department of Health, including during the COVID-19 pandemic. Jodie Quillam is currently the Clinical Placement Unit Manager within UniSA's Allied Health and Human Performance School. In her previous role as the Professional Experience Manager in Education Futures at UniSA, Jodie was instrumental in leading the complex integration of two separate placement teams, each operating with its own systems and processes in the lead up to the merger of University of Adelaide and the University of South Australia under the new Adelaide University banner. Jodie's leadership focused on continuity of education and placement experiences, maintaining high standards for students for both institutions while equipping her team with the skills, confidence and knowledge needed to support the transition. Her commitment to customer support, community engagement and partnership development remained central throughout the process. So talking of the UniSA University of Adelaide merger, it's probably one of the biggest change management processes the sector's ever seen. Jodie, as someone who's part of that ongoing change, could you give us a bit of an overview of what's happening?
It's been an exciting few years since the announcement. New university was announced sort of in the middle of 2023, and then things didn't start happening with this change process until the beginning of 2024. Then we had some the staff impact essentially when this was first announced, everybody was pretty excited. I think there was a lot of excitement around. There was some apprehension and a bit of uncertainty because we've all been through some change. The preparation time frame was immediately a bit concerning because it was a couple of years. And the other big component, I think, for that announcement was that day one, January 1st, 2026. And as we know, 2026 or any given year, you've got a whole lot of preparation time before 1st of January. So you don't open up on 1st of January and go, hello, what do we need to do this year? So there was a bit of apprehension. There has been a little bit of pressure with regard to timing of the announcements of our senior managers, and that has impacted essentially everything else. So there have been, we went sort of from this period of real excitement to building apprehension. So as we're getting closer, we're 5 weeks away from new university, and everybody is a little bit anxious that we haven't tried and tested things in the way that we normally would have. So that's kind of where we're sitting at the moment with regard to new university.
So I mentioned in my introduction of you that you've recently been successful in bringing the two education placement teams together. How did you manage that change process?
Well, we recognised pretty quickly that obviously being successful in the new university meant that we needed to be ready before day one. So that was our biggest challenge, because we didn't know what that was going to look like, who was going to be in what team, how were we going to come together, when was that going to happen? And that was absolutely the number one question from every staff member in every team that I associated with. And they were all like, well, what does this look like? What does this mean? How are we going to get things done, and who are we going to be engaging with? So I think my initial thought process was kindness. Let's actually everybody recognise that there's all sorts of emotions that are going around at the moment, and that we needed to be as prepared as we could be within what was within our control. So I really needed to talk with my senior managers about what that would look like. So I then sought the endorsement from my senior managers to actually engage with whoever is at our counterpart university to talk about what the future state might look like, and how I was going to be able to navigate that in amongst a very uncertain sort of future path. I thought about how we needed to do that, in that we needed to have some time to think about things, to talk about things, and to build some relationships, even with the uncertainty of not knowing that this might not be the team that we're working with in the future within our own institution or with our colleagues over the road. So we wanted to make sure that collectively across both of these teams that our students were not going to be impacted, or were going to be impacted the least amount in this whole process, because at the end of the day, that is the reason that we're all engaged with the university. And sometimes through those change processes, that can be lost. So I think what we wanted to do was we wanted to think about what do we need to have covered to ensure that our students were going to be best supported through that process. And the reality is you need to have a really calm, confident, happy team to be able to be responsive to student needs. So that's kind of the thinking. And I had to, obviously talking to our senior managers, we needed to have a think about what their priorities were and how we were going to ensure that they understood the risks of us not engaging before the 1st of January in 2026. So that was essentially the way that I went about it.
Now, can you just give us a bit of background in terms of the size of the number of placements that both institutions currently have?
Yes. Yeah.
And that sort of, and that they were two relatively disparate teams in terms of the volume of work that they had to do.
Yeah, we did have two, and this isn't necessarily reflected across all of the groups that are going to be coming together. But I was in the education space, looking after education placements in education providers for teaching students, and our unit looked after or established about 3,000 placements per annum. And then our counterparts were doing much less than that. So, they were generating about 500 placements. And obviously then we had the disparity of the ways of working at scale. You do need to do things differently. So we knew that there was going to be some significant differences in the way that we actually dealt with the day-to-day. And that was something that we needed to get out in the open very quickly. actually talk through the whys and wherefores and find ways that we were going to be able to agree on the ways of working moving forward. Also, we had two different teams with two different classification levels of staffing working within them, and two very different output expectations as well. So volumes of delivery, obviously, with one team having an at-scale output and one team having a much more case-managed, supportive sort of model of distribution was difficult. I think what we wanted to do was get that out early so that we could all talk about it and then talk about the ways that we were going to have to manage that in the new order. Alongside that, because of the delays with regard to the new university being formed, we're both still working even today in our foundation universities under our foundation EAs, even though we're obviously coming into the new university environment. Unfortunately, they haven't developed the EA yet, and they haven't done all of those HR back processes around harmonising the workforce and everybody being sort of classified at the same level. So if you can imagine, that is actually quite a sensitive environment to be working within, and knowing that you're going to have staff members essentially co-located and perhaps not necessarily feeling that they are being recognised at the same level. So these are things that we really needed to talk about early with our team, and part of that, or our respective teams, and part of that was also the recognition that nobody chose the environment that we're going into, that everybody's been thrown in here, and that we're all going to rise and find a way forward together without feeling that somebody else is more advantaged in this situation than what you are.
You think, with notwithstanding the restrictions that are around the larger merger, do you think it's been a successful, that you have brought that team together for the new university successfully?
I do think so. I hope that that will be demonstrated in the early year. But I mean, we have really good relationship. The teams have a good working relationship together. There was a lot of safety and honesty in the room when we undertook the workshops. We were undertaking workshops an hour and a half a fortnight, where everyone had to come together. And although it was a couple of hours out of their time every fortnight, it was invaluable investment into us being able to establish a real team working relationship. Yes, I do think it has been a successful exercise, and I hope that they will continue to, develop and grow as a team as they roll out their processes and continue to see how we can do things better together.
Jody, Emil, you've seen a lot of change management in the sector. Do you think we do it well? And are there areas of improvement?
That's a leading question. I think, regardless of our sector, inside and out, we can do change better. I think there's a couple of fundamental things in that. We were talking about this before. Every meeting that I have been, every conversation I've had today has been around change, whether it's small scale, large scale. I've been speaking with someone about system change. I've been speaking with someone about tech change, all of those things. I think post-COVID, where there's a sense that we know how to do change, and it's just expected that everyone knows how to navigate and can do it. But actually, there's some really important fundamentals. The leadership of change, the self-navigation of change, it's part of your toolkit. It's part of your professional toolkit. And so I suppose I'm pretty passionate about, I love that there are people here today thinking about change and taking the time to explore and think about it, because I think we lose it as part of the everyday. We've got meetings to go to and, emails to answer and all of those. But fundamentally, every workplace is navigating significant change at the moment, whether you've got one transformation project or 8. If you look at, the new university in Adelaide, that is not one change. That is, you know, so many layers of change. And so our leaders, our managers, our staff are all navigating multiple changes at once. And so, yes, so I think we can always do better with leading change. I'm not pointing fingers or saying we're bad, but there is absolutely scope that we can be better at it.
And how could we improve?
Oh, there's lots of ways about it. You know, one is actually really focusing on the fact that leadership of change is a capability, it's a skill. So to actually enable people to think about themselves as leaders of change. Another one is to actually co-design how we navigate change. I've been involved in quite a few projects where you talk about, can we bring people in to explore how we do this? It's like, no, we're not ready yet. Let's just wait until we're going to launch the change. We have to have confidence that we can bring everyone in, or core people, to help us think about change, and not all senior, at all levels as well. I think we have to be honest. You know, change can be tough. Change provides some great opportunities as well. And we have to create space for it. Quite often people are leading change projects off the side of their desk. You know, they've got the day-to-day, like, you know, Jody, we've heard really clearly, you know, she's running her, you know, currently doing all the placements for students for this year, but actually thinking about next year as well. So we don't often create space for change. I think we should put the spotlight on it a bit more.
And sort of leading into that, the speed of change, the impact of speed on change, is slower better, or is it the opposite?
Oh gosh. Can I just add one thing to the last question? I forgot to say, we often think about change as this loose term, and it's got really bad connotations with it. When I'm working with senior leaders about learning about change and thinking about how they can lead a change process, there's all these tools and skills and processes that you can bring into your toolkit. It's not just that change is a capability. There's all these sub pieces for it. So I'll just add that in. Fast or slow?
The Band-Aid, ripping the Band-Aid off better than pulling it?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the organisation's health. Yeah. When I was at the Department of Health and Human Services here in Victoria, we were mid-transformation, a major 3-year transformation when COVID hit and lockdowns hit. That was a really long change process. But in my time at the department, we also had what's called a machinery of government. And it was literally a phone call to say, we have to split the department into 2 departments. You have 6 weeks, go. That's a really yucky process to go through. And with that, you have very little time and you can do lots of damage. I think with all change, you've got to be really clear about what the purpose is and what you can do in the time frame that you have. You know, if I think about the new Adelaide University, would it be a better change if it was 5 years instead of 2 years? You know, there comes a point that you can drag it out too much. At every point, you're thinking about, what can we do? What must we do? What can we do? Unfortunately, what are we going to have to let pass? When you do quick change, I think you can't do that pre-build. So you can't let people connect to the reason why you're doing the change, etc. And so that quick change is often not as good. You can draw it out and make it too long, though. So it depends on the project. It depends on the health of the organisation. If your organisation has a culture of drive and innovation and willing to experiment, quick change can often work well.
Jody, with the Teams merger, do you think that you gave yourself enough time, you and the team enough time?
For our particular team's merger, yes, I think it was adequate time for us to, because essentially you're limited by what it is that you can then start to implement. So the foundation of developing the team, yes, I do think it was enough time. We did have, it was really over about a 4-month period, if I recall. Emma could have the timing slightly out there, but that was a good amount of time for everybody to establish a good relationship, and to and even gave us a little bit of time to where we were limited by further decisions, then have some scenarios that they could play out that, well, what if the decision goes this way, how are we going to deal with that? And that gave them just that inner confidence, some more inner confidence before we actually got to the opportunity to commence working together. The other thing with that, those two teams coming together, they have had to start working as day one, months in advance of it being formally available to them, which created its own challenges, obviously, because you're not on the same systems and you're not, in the same room and you're not reporting to the same people. But there's an enormous amount of goodwill that has gone into both of these teams to just acknowledge that, even though it's not recognised and it's not required and it's not been demanded of them, they've elected to actually come together and do the very best that they can as a joint team. So yeah, I think they were actually really desperate to do that by the end of that 4-month period. They just wanted to get on with it. Yeah.
And Jodie, I suspect, sorry, Emma,
No.
I suspect you're only, even though the new university starts on 1st of January, that's not the end of the change process. You're only partway there. So exactly. The real important work goes on for the next 12, 18 months, 2 years, as you go through a couple of cycles of students, you do that team building, that culture building. But quite often, you see organisations go, we've delivered that change, new structure in place, 1st of January, tick, off we go. But the reality is, we all know, actually the real work even starts then.
It does. Yeah. I have had, obviously I've just moved out of one area and into another. So this area has not had the opportunity to connect in the same way as the teams did in the education space. And I see that they are actually where we were when we first sort of made that connection. And even they now, that quick move was done so that we can actually co-locate sooner rather than later. And there was a proactive choice that we said, we don't want to be doing this on the first week of January when they're back on the 5th. We don't want to be doing this then. We do want to be doing this, before, and knowing, and you're right, it is going to be significant change from day one. Will be a whole new change process for everybody as we learn what can and can't happen and how things should happen differently and better, and structures change and all of those things that are going to impact the way that we work, and it will evolve. Yeah.
Just in terms of that, looking that you've got a new team that have not come together, and then one where you've carefully managed them through that change to become one team. Do you think the earlier team will be more resilient to future change, will have a better ability to manage themselves through that process than perhaps the team that's still not really a cohesive group and don't see the way forward and don't have a plan, a forward plan for next year? Do you think that the other team will probably maybe better able to cope because they've been very carefully managed through a change?
I'd like to hope that's the case. As we all know, the more that you experience something, and you do learn from those experiences. And this team has definitely learned from the experience that we had, and how getting together and how having those conversations, the honesty that you talked about, Mary Louise, the honesty of being able to come together and feeling safe and expressing things and just talking things through, and also recognizing that the grief of not continuing in the way that you once were can sometimes actually be an amazing advantage, and that you can learn and grow from that. So I'd like to hope that is the the case. Resistance is real. So, everybody, once you get comfortable with doing something in the way in which you're doing it, there's always going to be a bit of grief around, having to adjust. But Mary Louise, you also talked about the why, and understanding the why that change is happening in your environment. I think that they're probably going to be better versed at asking the right questions and actually speaking out and ensuring that people are aware of what their main concerns are, so that there might be an opportunity for them to be addressed. Because I think, as a lot of staff members, when change is happening, they're not privy to all of that information, and they feel that maybe now's not the time for me to raise that I've got a concern around something. I'd like to hope that this team will, in the next change iteration that they have, and there will be another one and another one and another one in the coming years, that they're going to be really confident to say, hey, I feel like this is a risk, and here's the reasons why I think it's really important that we talk about it and address it, instead of staying silent and getting anxious and stressed about it. So I hope.
And sorry, Marianne.
So I was just going to say, because that honesty and that openness is really important, and it requires a maturity of leadership to be able to create those spaces, but it's really important. And I quite often see that in change processes, we don't talk about grief. We don't acknowledge that even though the change may be positive and people want to step towards it and be part of something new and exciting, it is natural that there is grief, because they're part of something that, fingers crossed, they already love. And so, you have to create that space for them to acknowledge, the change and the grief, but carry, I suppose, leave that experience well to go towards something that is exciting. But there is a lot of, quite often in change we do the logistics around who's going to sit where, how many roles report to this. But actually there's this whole piece about us as people with feelings and, connections and value, all of those things that we get from our work. So the fact that you talk about grief is actually really important. I think maybe, I don't know, this is a brewing hypothesis. Maybe it's a sign of immaturity that when you're doing change management, you just focus, of course it's going to be better on the other side. But you actually have to acknowledge it's been good here too. We're not changing because you were bad or you're doing things. We're changing for different reasons, and then that comes back to the why.
Yeah. I think, when you're talking about the better on the other side bit, sometimes, well, at least I found in this, not just this process, but maybe some previous ones, that there's an apprehension about that. There's a sense that maybe, but is it? You say it's going to be, but is it really? This works really well. We're really comfortable with this, and I feel like what has been useful with those workshops that we did undertake was making sure that we actually embed that there are opportunities to stop and review and confirm if our new way forward is actually delivering on the promises that, it made through this process, so that people understand that change isn't finite. Like, you don't just go, as you said, into this and now that's it and on we go and this is the way forward forevermore. That actually we're really just piloting what we believe to be the next iteration, and we do get an opportunity, and these staff members have a confidence to be able to come back and say, hey, the thing that we'd changed that was supposed to deliver this, it's not doing that. What do we do? And it might mean that we step sideways or backwards or reinvigorate whatever the plan is. And if they get an opportunity to feed into that process, then the likelihood of them actually living the change well is much better than it otherwise would be. And I think sometimes you've got to drag them into that space a little, because they don't believe it. So it is about that kind of, well, why don't you believe that would be better? Let's understand that. Is that because why? And then, hopefully then they will understand that they're so influential in this space by being honest and open about their experiences. that's what makes great teams. You need everybody's different perspectives on what's working well and what's not. Yeah.
Fantastic. This segues really nicely into my next question, which is, what are some of the things that teams can do at an operational level to encourage their leaders to be more proactive during change? I think sometimes leadership goes, this is the change, this is what's going to happen, but are stymied themselves by the events happening around them. So what are sort of things that teams can do to make sure that their leadership is engaged in the process?
I think the first one is actually that speak up piece. It is actually about respectfully putting their concerns on the table, getting them out there. And then Mary Louise talked about, we worry about the logistics of it all. And that is actually one of the first things that comes to the mind of staff when they hear that something's happening. That the location piece for Adelaide University has been hugely important to staff, far more important than I probably actually thought it would be, but it has been hugely important. So speaking up respectfully and putting on the table what their concerns are to their managers so that they can then start the conversation about, well, how can we get our leadership to actually represent us at the tables that we're not at? And I guess I went into that team and then obviously when it spoke to our peers as well and said, we don't know what your concerns are until you tell us. I can make some assumptions around things, but you need to be clear and honest about it. And just understanding the context of what those concerns are. So if the concern is about the fact that, well, I might not be going to be seated exactly in this seat, in this location, in this office, and that's going to affect me, that's okay. We can hear that, but we're going to have a conversation around maybe that's not something we can take to the senior managers right at this point. We're going to park that and we'll worry about it a little bit later, and just giving people some reasonable expectations around how it is that we're going to be able to move their concerns forward and be advocates for what it is that they would like to see out of that change. Clarifying maybe that scope of control of, so once we hear all of that, which is what those workshops were really great for, we could hear, well, what is it that's concerning to you? And I think if I recall, Emma, we kind of pivoted at the beginning. We had a plan of action of these are the things that we were going to talk about. And then we realised actually this is the opportunity for everybody to just say what their concerns are, and let's just actually prioritise according to what everybody else felt that they needed to feel comfortable with, so that we could then get down to the stuff that we really needed to do. So I think that was important. And taking ownership that every staff member has an opportunity to influence the way change feels and how successful that change process is. And you can make a proactive choice to be a part of this in a positive way. And I think you get to do that if you feel that you're having an opportunity to actually contribute. If you think about the way that, we run consultation processes and we say, here, give us your feedback. And then we get this enormous amount of feedback. And then when they put out the outcome, in a few weeks' time, you think, where is my feedback here? Where is it that they've paid attention to what I've said? And people lose faith in that process. But if they get to do that, undertake that consultation with their managers, and their managers sincerely actually take their concerns forward, we can frame it in the way that we know that we're going to be able to get some leverage where it's important, and where it's not, where it's something that we go, this is not the time for us to influence that. We have that honest conversation with our staff and we say, hey, I know that's really important to you, and it is parked over here. And when we get an opportunity to bring that forward, we'll do that. But we're going to focus on these core issues that are perhaps able for us to influence in the way that we did with actually getting the backing to have the coming together of these teams. We were the only group in the university who did that. And we did that, I think, because we managed to actually really articulate what our teams needed to feel confident coming into the new university. So, yeah, if they're positive and proactive and collaborative, that's what everybody needs to be with their leaders and then expect that of their leaders to, up the chain effectively. And I do feel like my senior managers recognised that this was a sincere collaborative process and that we were trying to bring an outcome that was going to be as beneficial as possible given the circumstances.
Thank you for that. This is a question for both of you, and perhaps we'll start with you, Emil. How do you manage change fatigue or prevent burnout during these times? And I mean, a 2-year change plus possibly another 3 or 4 years ahead of it is just burnout central. Is there different advice for operational teams versus leaders in terms of managing that burnout?
I think overall the overarching message is, we often talk about the oxygen mask. I flew in last night in plane. Put your oxygen mask on first, then look after the person next to you. I think, so there's some absolutely key things. And especially big major change. It's not one marathon, it's multiple marathons and sometimes happening at the same time. So, Jodie was talking about that, what can you control and what can you influence? I think there is so much we should do for being in the workplace to keep ourselves healthy, to keep mentally fit. And that's even more important during times of change. And it's the first thing that drops away. I think a real key piece that gets forgotten and, is around that's putting in network to support you, especially if you're a leader navigating change, but then have that network of support for each other. So, we're thinking about teams and how they go through change. Different people in that team will experience change differently. You'll have your early adopters who are like, oh, this is so exciting. I'm there. You've got people at the back going, oh, not again. We just changed, and everyone in between. And everyone in between, or everyone is influenced by what's happening around them. Are they looking after aging parents? Have they got a young family? Are they living, there's so many things that impact how you experience change on that day. But if you have a couple of key things, if you feel that you've got strong support from your leader, if you feel that you've got a network of people around, you're navigating this, but you help each other on the good days and the bad days, etc. I think those 2 things are really key. I think 2 things I would call out. The first thing is middle managers get squashed in these big change processes because they're caring for the people below, so close to the operational coalface. And then at the time they're trying to navigate up and negotiate better outcomes. So we really need to look after our middle managers. They get lost during change. I then think for anyone here who's a leader, that informal network is really important. So yes, I was at the Department of Health during COVID. I could write books and books about that experience. But towards the end, I had been in the transformation division, quite a number of directors. There was 3 of us at the end. 5 had redeployed to elsewhere in the department to help with COVID. The one thing that I think, it's not going to be in any change textbook, but the one thing that really helped me navigate that really intense time of leadership, 5 o'clock each day, the 3 of us came together, whether online or in person, better in person, leant against the door frame and said, how was your day? And you could say, this happened, whatever. You processed it, you synthesized it. You had someone saying, oh, that sounds like that was a really tough meeting, whatever. It was such a small thing. 4 years on, we still talk about what a difference that made to our leadership. Such a small thing. And so I always come back to who is your support, who is your network. Quite often we think about leaders, being at front, leading change, bold, decisive, a solo figure, but actually it's a joint leadership of change, and acknowledging that leaders are having to make hard decisions every day as part of a transformation process as well. Sorry, that was very long-winded.
That's fine. Jodie, have you got anything? I mean, in terms of you were able to carve out some space for your team to sort of block out the noise of the bigger change. I mean, that's I think very rare in the change I've been through in institutions, having that capacity to focus on a very small part of the change that's immediately affecting me as an individual is a very rare thing. I mean, did you deliberately carve out that time, or was it more accidental, and do you see value in doing that?
It was deliberate, and that is because the change in this particular circumstance, the teams within our unit were all affected differently. So our team was assigned into their roles, and so they had a particular comfort in that awareness of where they were going. And some of our other unit teams were in a much more precarious scenario where they were going to have to do preferencing and EOIs and uncertainty about where they were going. And of course, we're all very connected, so everybody knows everybody, and it was very easy to get drawn into everyone else's concerns around the change that actually weren't necessarily the experience of my team. So I felt it was really important that they got an opportunity to step away and really just laser focus on the things that we knew that they were going to be able to control and influence. I feel incredibly grateful that we were afforded the opportunity to do that. And I did have to talk to the team about the fact that the taking that time, that workload collectively across that broader group was significant, which meant that there was extra pressures outside of that time to, keep things going, because BAU was still happening and you're still being asked to, contribute to other things. And we had a employment freeze in the middle of all of that. And so it was going to be really easy for us to drop it, Emma. It was going to be easy for us to say, hey, look, we need that time back. And collectively as a team, we actually got together and said that. We said, well, do you realise that this front end effort is going to be really valuable? But at the end of the day, they all had to buy into that and recognise that yep, okay, I'm going to leave that and I'm going to go into this and I'm going to get my head there. But it was a good skill for them to understand how to switch off from all of that and to step in, control what you could. And when you came out, they were always really positive. I don't know if you recall we're stepping out of the room, but there was continued conversations. There was people who were happy to go, okay, actually, I'm going to give 10 minutes more to this because it's really important before I step away and get back into my normal day-to-day. And yeah, I think it was very valuable for them to be able to learn the skill to step away from the noise. And I think it is there is a lot going on, and in any change process there's a lot going on of which you care about your co-workers, and so you can find yourself getting drawn in. But I hope, and I did have some examples where some of our staff members then took their learnings from how we were managing things back to their peers outside, their village, their support people that were in other teams, and said, hey, why don't you try doing this? Just so that you can focus on, the thing that was really disturbing them and keeping them up at night. Then say it, share it with somebody else. See if you can get some leverage with your senior managers to support you through that process. And Mary Louise, you talked about, leadership actually needing somebody within their orbit as well. And I definitely did that. I reached out to other GMs outside of our unit whose teams weren't getting the support, the opportunity to collaborate in the way that we did. And that was really good for me to be reminded that even though we're dealing with all of this, there are other teams who aren't afforded the opportunity to make that connection early. Yeah, so it was good.
Another question for both of you, and one I think is probably happens more often than not, is that how do you deliver effective change leadership when you're in the same situation? You're facing that major change yourself. And often if you don't agree necessarily with the change that's happening or that you're personally impacted by, how do you do that? How do you still deliver effective change management leadership?
I was going to say, Jodie, do you want a paper, scissors, rock? No, I'll go first. I think, look, I've been part of a change process when I made my role redundant. I think, look, there's two things. I mean, there's first of all, as a leader, you actually do have to say at some points, am I on board with this change? So, I've been offered roles, for change projects where I've actually said, no, that's not for me, because I knew that the ethos, the culture about how they led change, etc., and it was going to be oil and water. So I have said no to some change projects. I was really lucky. I was involved in the BIT project at University of Melbourne, and people have different views on the BIT project, but it was really clear in its purpose that it was finding money to reinvest into learning and teaching and research. So I was on board with that. I had a sort of a North Star for that. But if I think back to when I was at the Department of Health and Human Services and they came and said, okay, machinery of government, go, there is that moment where you go, am I on board? Am I not? That was a really difficult one for me because I didn't agree with what the government was doing and I knew it would cause pain. And so I came at it from a different point of view around, I know all of the people in this. We've been working with them for the last 3 years. My team have relationships. We are probably the best placed of anyone to help them through this difficult and significant change. So for me, it was probably an ethical decision there. But there are times that there is change that you're not fully on board with, and so you do have to think about it. I think as a leader, there is a point of, am I going to fight this change or am I on board? If you're 100%, I don't agree with this change, there's a decision you need to make. So I think there's compromises. I don't know. I'll hand over to you, Jodie, and see what you think.
I would say, similarly, everybody has a buy-in to what it is that they're undertaking. If there were a change process that I was fundamentally opposed to, I honestly would probably have a conversation with myself and go, I'm going to step away from this because I just can't align myself with that. Certainly with the new university, I was completely on board with that. I think it's an incredibly exciting opportunity, amazing opportunity to be a part of. There are aspects, obviously, that have come along the way that, if I had a choice, it probably wouldn't have been done in that way or in that time frame or whatever. And there are some decisions that I feel, when I've had to take those decisions to the team, I've known that internally this doesn't sit well with me. That said, I'm an honest person, I'm pretty transparent, so I will go into my team and I will say, hey, here's where we've landed. We've lobbied. This is what's happened. Which happened a little bit when we had the feedback around the structures. We got an opportunity to feed back in. Everybody's fed back in. We were really very successful in our lobbying in that space, and we feel very grateful for that. But there were certainly other teams where that didn't happen. And I was able to go back in and go, well, here's what we got over the line. Here's what we didn't. Am I on board with the fact that hasn't happened? It hasn't happened yet. We're going to continue to lobby for that in due course. But is it a deal breaker? No. So I think we just have to kind of, when you're not totally on board, I'd like to think it's a yet, unless it's a moral standing for me. That's probably where I'm at. You can't influence everything all the time, and also you're not necessarily privy to the foundations of the decision making. And there are sometimes decisions that have to be made for now, and that there might be a chance to move on to something more.
Jodie, you're part of creating history. I work in the sector. There are people in New Zealand and overseas talk to me about, they're so excited to see. And, I love the terminology, it'll be quite easy to say it's a merger, but actually it's a new university.
Yeah.
How often do you get to do that? And I'm an Adelaide girl, to have a university of that size and that scale, and with permission to do things differently, I think is really exciting. And so you can absolutely be on board with that. It's not going to, it's not going to be, everything's not going to go the way that you want it, but you can navigate through that.
Yeah, agreed. And I get motivated by that too, though. Like that you're going to get in, you're implementing the change in the way that it's been sought, and then you get to be part of that, dynamic opportunity to feed back into that continued evolution of, you started here and you continue to develop to over here, because that's what universities do. That's kind of what we're all about. So I think it's a fabulous opportunity, and and if it weren't, I would be reassessing as to whether I wanted to be a part of it or not. So I definitely, as soon as they announced it, and there'd been a few times in the years past at this university where this thing was touted, it almost got off the ground a few other times. And so there was a bit of cynicism initially going, oh, okay, yeah, we've heard all that before. But when it actually really was announced and we recognised it was going to happen, I was certainly one of the staff members that was particularly excited by the thought of the prospect of being able to be involved in some way, even moving out, from education and into health for this time frame. That was a little bit of a decision for me, because we put all of this effort into education. I really want to see them flourish in the new university, but it was also an opportunity to help to support another area in a different way, support this new university in a different way. So yeah, it's an exciting time for me anyway.
We had a really good question from the registrants who, when they registered, about, and we've touched on it very briefly, but maybe we can explore it just a bit more, is how can leaders look after themselves when they're leading a team through change? And you talked, ML, about, having those people, having those doorstop sessions with your other colleagues. Are there other things that you can do that can help you look after yourself?
It's probably all the sensible things that people will say around, make sure that you plan holidays, make sure that you eat well, make sure, there's all the things we know that we have to do, but actually in the face of change, we let go. Oh, look, I'll just have a packet of chips for dinner. Oh, I don't need to go for I should go for a walk this morning, but I'll sit at my inbox, and do emails. I've got a presentation. So we let the self-care slip. So I think there is one piece about being beautifully selfish about corralling some time for yourself, acknowledging that it is multiple marathons. And I remember talking with the DepSec at the department and persuading them to have a long weekend. And it was very hard to get people at the department to step back during COVID. That they came back after 3 days and they turned their phone off. They came back after 3 days so energized, ready to run another marathon. So having regular points to step back. I think having some reflective, I spoke about my peers, but also having some reflective points where you could talk with people about how you feel, where you're at. So whether you seek counselling, whether you get coaching or something like that, creating your safe space. You're spending lots of time creating safe space for others to talk about how they're feeling and change. You carry the load of that. So you absolutely need your own space as well.
Anything to add to that?
Yeah, look, I'd agree. I think probably my lessons learned over the years have been perspective and recognising my own circle of influence and carrying the burden of something of which you cannot control is not very good for my health. So I'm probably better at acknowledging that I can put it aside. I do have my connects within the university who understand the environment, who you can, share with, and then you can let it go. And you do need to rest and recover, and you do need to switch off. I don't have my emails on my phone anymore. That was just such an enormous shift in the way I conduct myself. and the guilt, you know, that, and the, oh my goodness, and what if someone needs me? And I mean, I still have Teams on my phone, so and they all have my mobile, and, you know, and I had to really sit down and think that through and go, well, actually, there's no babies dying here. You just probably need to put this in perspective and recognize that you're actually better support for everybody else when you are looking after yourself as well. And I listen to myself in the way I expect other people to support themselves, and, you know, recognize when somebody is at the end, hey, actually, you need a wellbeing day. You need to take some time out. You need to turn that off. We need to take that and support you with that for a minute, and then come back refreshed. But that was something that was very difficult for me personally to do. So I've probably got a little better at that through this, because this has been a tedious transformation, and there's just been times where I've had to do that. Otherwise, I don't think I'd be any good to myself or others. So it's...
That's it. And I think a bit of how you exit the workday and enter the workday. Like, at what point, where's the boundary where you open the door to work? You know, I'm trying really hard not to check work emails when I get out of bed. You know, there's got to be a real discipline around that. But I think, you know, if you think about the transition into work and the end of your workday, so, you know, if you're commuting home from work and you listen to a podcast, or you do something totally different that helps your brain switch out of that high state of where you're operating into something different. So, yeah, so transitions in and transitions out, I think.
Yeah.
Nice. I have a final question for you both, and we've got just a couple of minutes left. So if you were to give one piece of advice about leadership in change management, what would it be?
Always keep learning.
Yeah, I was going to say curiosity, like be open, because it's easy to fall into the immediate assumption when something is presented. Bam, there you are. So take a physical breath, have another read, get creative in your thinking. Yeah.
And mine, and as someone who's been through a lot of things, would just be think about the bigger picture.
Mm.
Where you fit in that bigger, where you or your team fits in that bigger picture, because that is important, is that you are a cog in that wheel, and without that cog, it won't work.
Yeah.
Some wisdom there.
So on behalf of everybody who attended today, I'd just like to say thank you so much for a fantastic conversation. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope that our audience has got some takeaways from today. I think there's a lot impacted in what we've done in the last hour. So Emelle and Jodie, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to catching up sometime soon. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Oh, thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. Any questions, reach out via LinkedIn. Happy to have a chat about all things change.
Yeah, same. Feel free to reach out if you'd like to connect around anything.
Thank you.